Hello, welcome. So I am here to present Nina Pilke. She is a professor of Swedish and languages for specific purposes at the University of Vaasa in Finland. She wrote her PhD thesis in 2000 on dynamic concepts, action and events within the fields of technology, medicine and law. Professor Pilke has been teaching a wide range of language courses from professional communication to automatic proofreading in all faculties of the universities of Vaasa. These include business studies, technology, and of course philosophy. For more than 20 years, she's been working for Nordtem, an association of organizations and societies of the Nordic countries that are engaged in terminology work, training and research. Professor Pilke is chair of Terminology Research and Training Group, and she's also a board member of the International Institute of Terminology Research. Professor Pilke's current research interests encompass terminology, language policy, and strategies in multilingual organizations, bilingual practices, and translatorial action in bilingual formal meetings, and language learning in multilingual LSP context in upper secondary and higher education. She is the leader of the research team Bilingualism and Communication in Organizations, which focuses on the ways of which bilingualism functions in Finnish organizations from a professional discourse point of view, and it specs its challenges and future perspectives in a changing society. In 2016, she has co-edited a book entitled, and I cannot speak Finnish, but I did attempt in translating it with the help of the Embassy of Finland, considering terminology, a northern perspective. And of her recent English publication is entitled From Slow Repetition to Awkward Omission, Economic, Efficient and Precise Language Use in Bilingual Formal Meetings. So, please join me in welcoming Professor Pilke, who's going to present the Finnish context, and her talk is entitled, and I really like the title, about blind man appraising and an elephant in the room. So, welcome.
Thank you so much. Well, it has been a long day, an intensive day. But now Finland needs your help with immersion in higher education. So 60 minutes more to go. Good to have these coupons, I think, after my talk. So let's start. I would like to thank the organizers of this symposium for inviting me, or should I say, for accepting my offer to participate instead of my colleague, Siv Björklund, who is the leading immersion expert in Finland. Compared to Siv, I consider myself an outsider and a novice in immersion research, but I have my office next to Siv's, and we have built up some research projects together, and we also supervise several immersion-related PhD theses together. In conjunction with these research projects, I have had the opportunity, for example, to visit immersion classrooms in basic education. And based on written material, I have written a couple of articles dealing with immersion pupils' concept systems and use of terminology. In my administrative role as Vice Dean, I have been very involved with the development work within the field since we started a new teacher education program in Vaasa 3 years ago. And finally, I have been involved in some cases of developing bilingual higher education in my role as specialist in languages for special purposes and terminology. This is my first visit to Canada and your beautiful city, Ottawa. And standing here today means a lot for both Finland and me personally. in several ways, as my talk hopefully will show you. I have two overall aims with this presentation. Number one is to identify and describe the forms of immersion in higher education in the Finnish education system. And number two is to discuss the possibilities and needs for future development. The key question is, do we have immersion in higher education in Finland? This question may sound trivial, but when I started to prepare this talk, it soon became obvious that there are different views and also possibilities for approaching this thematic. In seeking the answer to the question, I'm going to take the Finnish bilingual society as starting point and study the intention and extension of the concept of immersion in higher education by conducting a brief conceptual analysis. The overall theme for this symposium, where do we stand today, proved to be highly relevant in the Finnish context. The outline of my presentation looks like this. I will start by telling the beginning of a personal anecdote, to which I will return when wrapping up the discussion at the end of my talk. And to begin with, I will give you a short overview of the provision of education in Finland, and also a short history, description of the current situation, and some future perspectives connected to language immersion. The core of my talk consists of the results of the research conducted by the research team Language Immersion and Other Multilingual Learning Environments at the University of Vaasa. In my concluding remarks, I will propose a conceptual framework for adult immersion in higher education in Finnish context. And before revealing the end of the anecdote, I will try to answer the question in my title, what can be said about the elephants? Let's start with the anecdote, which I have named How I Became a Byproduct of Canadian Immersion. This is the beginning of the story. When I was 11 years old, my family moved from Finland to Sweden. My parents placed me in a Finnish-speaking class in a Swedish school. This is a concept where the proportion of Swedish language increases gradually, and in the 9th grade it's 100%, excluding the lessons in L1. During the 3 years we stayed in Sweden, I felt like in this photo, which was taken on the Åland Islands between Finland and Sweden. I was literally between languages, first nearer Finnish, and then I started to move gradually closer to Swedish. My class in the school was heterogeneous. Some pupils were born in Sweden, and their parents' primary intention was the maintenance of the child's and family's Finnish language. The school's policy for language learning for someone like me, with very limited skills, was to prioritize the learning of vocabulary. And this was done mostly alone. The first year, I remember sitting in silence in a separate classroom together with a boy in similar situation, taking reading comprehension tests, dealing, for example, with different animals and their typical behavior. I still remember the text about beavers, for example. The result of sitting in silence with the tests was that I was both afraid and incapable of using the language orally. When I started to take writing lessons, I understood all the instructions, but when the instructor asked me how to perform a specific task, I was always unable to answer, staying silent so long that she directed her question to someone else in the group. and I still remember how I felt. It was a mix of shame and failure. But I kept going to the writing lessons because I loved the hobby in spite of the communicative threat. When we then moved back to Finland after 3 years in Sweden, my Swedish teacher often let me read chapters from books aloud in the class because she had noticed that I had an authentic Swedish accent. There still were very few chances to the way I actually spoke the language. So in my opinion, I developed from a silent word bank to a pronouncing parrot during these years. Now we will leave this story for a while and return to it at the end of my presentation. I'm now going to give you a brief description of the provision of education in Finland. We have 2 official languages, Finnish and Swedish. The education system is the same for these languages, these national languages from kindergarten to higher education. Internationally, the Finnish form of bilingualism provides an interesting point of comparison because Swedish is not legally considered as minority language, but is instead one of the national languages that has equal status as society-peering languages, even though the Swedish-speaking population is very small, only 5% of the population. And this slide shows our education system as a figure. Higher education is divided into 2 parts. In total, there are 16 universities and 26 universities of applied sciences in Finland. 5 of these units are Swedish-speaking, and they offer education for 3% of the students in higher education. Both profiling and uniting some of the units is a current topic in the societal discussion at the moment. The population in Finland is 5.5 million, so how many units do we need is the question. Also, the language-based division into Finnish and Swedish units is a regular topic, but there are no serious official political movements to break the parallel system for the moment. One major change made in 2004 in the examination system in upper secondary schools affected the situation for the national languages, and we will take a look at that next. Everyone in Finland is required to learn the other national language. These language studies can begin in the 3rd grade or at latest in the 6th grade. This was recently changed. Earlier the limit was 7th grade. One big change in the educational system was made in 2004 when Swedish was not longer one of the 4 compulsory subjects in the matriculation examination. And this examination entitles the candidate to continue his or her studies at university. After the test was made optional, the number of students not choosing Swedish has steadily increased. In 2006, 76% of the students took the test in Swedish, while last year the figure was 39%. Especially boys tend not to take the test. This has begun to have an impact on the students' language skills in such a way that even politicians have awakened to the problem. These 2 articles here in Finnish from this spring show that the Prime Minister of Finland is concerned, and first in February he said that he is ready to discuss whether the Swedish test should be made compulsory again. And 1 month later, in March, he said that maybe one way would just to develop the teaching of Swedish in upper secondary schools, so that the requirements of working life will be met. In fact, What he means is that upper secondary school could give students the proficiency which they currently gain in the university studies. In my opinion, this kind of change calls for extensive methodological and research-based new thinking. We have no bilingual schools in Finland, but this issue is being actively debated at the moment. This pie chart shows how 118 candidates in the municipal election this spring answered the question whether there should be bilingual schools in my hometown, Vaasa. 76% agreed, 19% disagreed, and 5% chose not to comment. Bilingual campuses that are shared by Swedish and Finnish schools and that also cooperate in education exist in all educational levels. In Vaasa, we have one bilingual campus at the general upper secondary level and one at the level of higher education. Bilingual education in higher education is actualized, for example, at the University of Helsinki, which is the one and only bilingual university in Finland. And here it's possible to take a bilingual degree in 9 special fields if at least 30% of the courses are taken in Swedish and 30% in Finnish. In this possibility, the focus lies in the end product consisting of blocks taught in different languages. When I started to go through the existing forms of bilingual education in Finland, I discovered that it is not so easy to say what immersion actually is, but it is easier to say what it is not. And this form of bilingual education is, in my opinion, not immersion. In these programs, individuals just pick courses in the other national languages for their degrees. From the parallel study program in the other national language. And language courses, which are shown as yellow circles in this image, are separated by language group, and there's no or very little overall planning between the degree programs in Finnish and Swedish. I put immersion here with a question mark because, as I said earlier, I'm not quite sure what forms of immersion we have in higher education. The next slides deal with immersion in Finland in general. Let's start with a short history. You maybe know this, I don't know. Immersion was introduced in Finland after Professor Kriste Laurén and his wife Ulla Laurén got inspired by and impressed with the program in Canada in the 1970s. Immersion teaching following the Canadian model was started in Vaasa in 1987. It is one-way early total Swedish program for Finnish-speaking children. And I think that this is the best souvenir ever. Teacher training and education within the field started as continuing education also in 1987. A special class teacher training program was implemented in 1998, and research in immersion has been conducted mainly at the University of Vaasa. Quite a lot has been said about immersion education in national reports after the implementation of the program in 1987. In one national evaluative report, which was released in 2012, the coordination of immersion education in Finland was found insufficient at the national level. The report mentions lack of competent teachers, as well as need for continuing education and planning of coherent teacher education. The heterogeneous terminology used is seen as a threat against equality because contents under the same label can vary a lot. And similar findings were included in the government resolution in the same year. Immersion is seen as a successful method, but still very limited. And this report suggests that better conditions should be created for ensuring adequate and high standard immersion teaching. After this, some words about the immersion teacher training and its current situation are in order. As mentioned earlier, the first program started in 1998. It was a joint project between the University of Vaasa and the University of Oulu, which is located in the northern part of Finland. Halfway through their studies, the students were forced to move from a bilingual area to a monolingual one, and this was problematic. Other problems in this program were that, according to the students, there was not enough content in Swedish, the choices for minor studies were limited, and the program gave generic skills instead of preparing the job of an immersion teacher. The first program ended in 2009 when the University of Oulu carried out large structural changes and did not want or could not continue with immersion training. The second program started in 2014 in Vaasa as a joint effort between the University of Vaasa and Åbo Academy, the Swedish-speaking university unit with pedagogical expertise. One of the main differences between the two programs is that in the first one, with Oulu, the pedagogical studies, which cover 40% of the program, were given in Finnish, while in the second, they are in Swedish. As a result of this change, Swedish is the language of instruction in 95% of the courses in the second program. This second program has been a success in many ways. It's attractive to students. The students are motivated and they study effectively, and the cooperation between the university units runs with no problems. But in August 2017, the University of Vaasa is going to transfer language-related training and research as a transfer of business to the University of Jyväskylä in the middle of Finland. And in this process, the contract with Åbo Academy was also terminated last summer, and the future of the program is uncertain once again. I have discussed the immersion-related parts of the current program with leading colleagues working with immersion teaching, and they actually do not agree on this. One of them say that this is not immersion, and another one identifies immersion-related aspects within it, and in her opinion, the program could be developed into an immersion program if there was more integration between the pedagogical studies, the immersion methodology studies, and courses in Swedish language. She would also increase the small proportion of Finnish in the current program and make changes that would ensure that bilingualism is supported in such a way that is characteristic of immersion education. And here you can see pictures and names of my colleagues whose research I'm going to quote next in my presentation. Professor C. Björklund, who I mentioned at the beginning, is the leader of the research team at the University of Vaasa. She and Karita Mård-Miettinen work with immersion in basic education. The two ladies below, Siva and Karita, are Mari Bergirud and Sirpa Sipula, who have written their PhD thesis on immersion in higher education. And as far as I know, they are the only two on this topic in Finland so far. As a concept analyst, I will start with the concepts and terms and concepts. As in the international context, the term immersion is de-terminologized also in Finland. About 15 years ago, we actually tried to get copyright on the words for immersion in Finnish and in Swedish, but it was impossible, or should I say too late. They should have been registered in 1987 when the first children started in the program, and maybe they should have been designed as some kind of logo even then. Today, the word immersion can mean everything from language course or language club with no traces of immersion methodology to Princess Charlene, who speaks 4 languages, to her twins. Also, the scientific terminology is rich and constantly developing. I find concept analysis always relevant and helpful, and therefore this talk will be dealing with the characteristics of concepts and concept systems. It will be interesting to hear your opinions and advice, especially on the terminological part. My colleagues, Siv and Karita, have tried to find some order in the scientific terminology by comparing what is said in the curriculum for basic education. They first took a diachronic look at the texts and found out that we have moved from general to specific, from no guidelines to guidelines and restrictions in 20 years. In 1994, there was no mention of immersion education or CLIL in the curriculum, whereas 10 years later, both were mentioned as part of language education, but they still remained undefined. In the latest text from 2014, both concepts are discussed in a separate chapter, and they are defined, and some details are also discussed. This development can be explained by the fact that our researchers have been participants of the working groups since 2010. The next 2 slides show the characteristics Siv and Karita have extracted from the texts after the categorization between small-scale and large-scale bilingual education was made. In small-scale bilingual education, less than 25% of the subject contents are taught in another language than the school's general language of instruction. And there are some other characteristics here, but we go further. And this slide shows how the main forms of large-scale bilingual education differ in the Finnish system. In immersion, the instruction is given in the national languages, Finnish and Swedish, so that at least 50% of the instruction is given in the immersion language throughout the program. The main criteria for large-scale CLIL are the use of one or several foreign languages, so that at least 25% of the basic education syllabus is provided in the target language or languages. This concept system shows the concepts in the curriculum and the defining characteristics which separate the concepts from each other, the languages of instruction and their percentage in the instruction. If we try to apply the same structure and model to higher education in Finland and find the criteria for adult immersion in this kind of concept system, it's clear for the moment that immersion should be located under small scale or perhaps between small scale and large scale education. But how appropriate is it to try to use the same categorization for basic and higher education when the time spent, for example, is totally different? This indicates that the division of small scale, large scale may not be the ideal functional starting point when we are talking about how adult immersion is implemented and how it should be developed in Finland. The first question here is, of course, do we have immersion in higher education, or is this some kind of a ghost concept, something not really in existence? So let's try to answer this question by looking what we can find. I skip that one and go here. I have been able to identify 3 educational structures with built-in bilingualism in which immersion is present. The first model has a course-based design which allows students in a Finnish program to choose the obligatory course in the other domestic language, Swedish, either as a traditional language course or a course with immersion adapted as methodology. Another course-based model is the second one, the middle one, where Finnish and Swedish programs have a joint obligatory subject course which uses immersion methodology. And the third model has a program-based design. Some of the subject courses are in Finnish and some in Swedish. The language groups have joint courses and also separate courses. In this model, language courses and linguistic aims are, as a rule, integrated with the subject courses. One of the researchers in Vaasa has illustrated the course versus program and content versus language dimension in the form of a triangle. Here you see Mari Bergroth's model from her PhD thesis, which she defended in 2007. In this figure, the 3 points of the triangle are immersion on the top and content teaching and language teaching at the base. When the role of content starts to increase in language teaching or the role of language in content teaching, we move toward language immersion. And next I'm going to give you concrete examples of different kinds of immersion-related models of education in Finnish higher education. And all my examples deal with Swedish immersion, the smaller national language. And after the examples, I will summarize the main points by presenting this triangle model in a modified form. We will start with immersion at the University of Vaasa. As a background fact, I can mention that Swedish has been compulsory school subject since the beginning of the 1970s at different educational levels in Finland. All university graduates must have certain level of proficiency in Swedish, and at the University of Vaasa, adult immersion in Swedish started with economic students in 1992 in the form of a course in the other domestic language, giving the needed competence in public servants' Swedish. In 25 years, this course has lost half of this volume as the credit points dropped from 10 to 5, and the current working hours for the students are 135. The course follows the criteria for immersion by emphasizing learner autonomy, use of target language, students' interest, initiative, and responsibility. The teacher has a special role, and the course design is theme-based, and both case and field study are used. And the students apply for this quite time-intensive course by writing a motivational letter. Sirpa Sipola's doctoral thesis from 2006 deals with this language competence-focused course design. Her material was collected in 2 groups, and it consists of observations, interviews, and written material. She focuses on goals, feedback, and vocabulary, and has both teachers and students as informants. One of the findings of Sirpa's study is that language courses following the immersion methodology produce satisfied students who trust their ability to use Swedish and are motivated to learn more. The teachers told in the interviews that the teams tend to be too varied and extensive, and both students and teacher pointed out the lack of feedback on oral skills. Also, student-initiated feedback was limited. In the writing skills, Sirpa could verify clear development in productivity, but only slight changes in vocabulary. Sirpa now works as lecturer at the Language Center at the University of Vaasa. She teaches 2 groups per year using immersion methodology, one with students from economics and one with students from humanistic science. In this way, about 50 students are offered this opportunity each year. A new aspect of the course is that 5 of the conduct lessons are web-based. Digitalization, the new catchword in Finnish educational discourse, has changed course design in a positive way, according to the teacher. She uses a task called Debate of the Week, which means that students are supposed to take turns choosing a theme and discussing it together actively via a platform during a period of 1 week. A methodological expansion towards bilingualism takes place when a Finnish-speaking group at the University of Vaasa cooperates with a Swedish-speaking group at Hanken School of Economics by using tandem, in which students act as a language model for each other over a period of 6 hours. The main challenges for these immersion-based courses is money. The groups are smaller than more traditional ones. And this fact, together with the lack of teachers, is the main reason for the restriction to 2 groups only. Both the teacher and I see integration with subject courses as future possibility for developing the course and increasing the number of groups. So far, immersion in higher education has been limited to language courses at the University of Vaasa. But different possibilities for organizing bilingual education are discussed regularly. Here I have a student who said on Facebook in February this year that Vaasa should have a trilingual campus instead of all the small units divided according to language. And people have commented both for and against as usual. In 2010, our former rector at the university commissioned me to write a report concerning the possibilities for organizing bilingual studies. I carried out an electronic questionnaire aimed at students in order to find out how they think and what they want. Nearly 300 students from all 4 faculties answered the questions. This table shows whether the informants continued the sentences "for my skills in Swedish, bilingual studies would, and bilingual studies feel like", with positive, negative, or emotionally mixed aspects. The majority of the answers included positive aspects when dealing with skills. Combined with feelings, the biggest group, 41%, consisted of negative aspects. This table shows the dynamics between the skills, feelings, answers in more detail. A little over 1/4 of the answers belong to the category positive on both sides. Next come the combination positive, negative, followed by positive, negative, and positive, negative, negative. The negative, the second line here, combination is, in my opinion, the only totally non-target group for bilingual education. This combination covers 10% of the students. And I have some examples of the answers here. In the positive-positive combination, the students can, for example, mention working life when they think about skills and that it feels like an interesting possibility worth developing. Future goals, which do not include Swedish language, may result in negative feelings when the students find the language unnecessary. The positive-negative answers often stress the time aspect, saying that it's more time-consuming if the instruction is bilingual. This is familiar, I think, for everyone. The possibility of working in the bilingual region of Ostrobothnia with equal division between Finnish and Swedish speakers is mentioned as a positive aspect by the students. I also asked the students how much they are willing to study bilingually. In these questions, English was also present as an alternative, and this figure shows that studies in English are the most popular alternative in major, minor, introductory studies and free choice studies. The curves changed radically when the students were asked if they are willing to study all their courses in basic studies, subject studies, or advanced special studies in Swedish, English, or bilingually in Finnish and Swedish. Even MA programs stay under the 50% marker here. Based on these results, these kinds of programs are perhaps not what the university should invest in, even though the students see it as a possibility. Next, we will take a look at the planning and the results of planning at 3 universities of applied sciences. The universities are located in Pietarsaari and Vaasa on the west coast and in Porvoo on the south coast. And we have been there with the team, research team, and looked at the results. In these universities, the language groups were separated before 2013. And the universities actually had bilingual status. This separation was primarily a question of securing the linguistic rights of the minority speakers rather than actively keeping the Finnish and Swedish speakers separated. And in an attempt to further strengthen the linguistic division, new legislation was implemented, resulting in bilingual universities of applied sciences becoming monolingual. And this raises the question whether also bilingual administration and monolingual pedagogics have turned into monolingual administration and bilingual pedagogics. And Mari from the University of Vaasa studied one planning process in her PhD thesis in 2007. That is before the change of the bilingual status. She documented the planning and the implementation of 2 Swedish courses arranged as LSB Immersion in 2003. And focus of her research is on language strategy work, creating a model and developing principles. Here are the main findings of her study. She found out that the planning was partly deficient. She documented lack of time and lack of teachers' commitment. She was also able to summarize that the teacher's new linguistic role in the classroom clearly requires education, which was not available in the required form and scope. And here are then some functional aspects and things which need to be developed. For example, course material and use of the bilingual environment. Let's move to Porvoo in southern Finland. And also here, the language groups were separated in the actual teaching courses until 2013. At this university, this decision affected 2 programs, namely tourism and business economics. By planning a bilingual path for bilingual group, the university wanted to support bilingual regions with bilingual workers and also retain all the teacher positions. Mari and I participated in the planning processes in January 2013, 8 months before work with the first group started. In the group discussions, the teachers raised several critical points, like resources, methodology, the heterogeneous groups, and so on and so on. They were most concerned that their teaching would be less, they have less flexibility in their teaching and job. I carried out a small-scale follow-up of the program in March this year by interviewing the program leader and 2 teachers. Their answers show that selling and visual marketing actually started in 2013 as one of 3 paths within the business economic program. The following year, the path became a separate education program with an intake of 25 students. The program has been quite appealing after the 2 first pilot years and had nearly 250 applicants in 2015 and 2016. The marketing of the program is done bilingually, and the number of Finnish speakers in the program is increasing, and it's now 60%. The program was designed over the last 4 years, and new bigger changes will take place next autumn, according to the teachers. For the moment, the instruction languages are as follows. English is fixed at 21%, the minimum of Swedish is 39%, and for Finnish, 23%. The program also includes at least 1 bilingual course. And this fact raises the question whether this is allowed in immersion, because the Finnish curriculum for basic education states that each subject must be taught in both languages, but not simultaneously in both languages. And such courses can also affect the ideology of keeping the languages separate and also lead to translanguaging. And I have heard interesting things here about translanguaging. And also last week I had the opportunity to listen to Jim Cummins in Vaasa, and he mentioned in his talk that translanguaging is a difficult issue in Canadian immersion. He said so. So it's interesting to hear what you say. The leader of the program uses the term aerial studies when describing the integration of language and content in projects. According to this principle, there are no separate language courses. The teachers I interviewed were satisfied with this and said that the cooperation was working well, at least partly because they are not so many. The main challenge for the bilingual program is that the students use Finnish in their mutual interaction, even when Swedish speakers are participating, and Finnish is used more and more also in student-teacher interaction. The new students' language skills are weaker than before, and therefore the teacher must lower the requirements and simplify their teaching. The Campus 2.0, they call it so, which is under preparation, means that all programs are going to have the same schedule, so that it will be possible and easy to take courses from several programs. The role of English, according to the teacher, is going to be emphasized, so that students can develop an ability to work in a trilingual environment during their studies. My last example of planning efforts is from Vaasa, and this is a short story because there simply are no concrete results. In 2009, the two universities of applied sciences in Vaasa started a project called Medipotnia. The idea was to move to a common campus and begin bilingual cooperation in nursing studies. The result today is campus, but no courses and no program exist so far. And this slide shows the situation for the three projects from the universities of applied sciences today. Pietarsaari and its pilot course are lost. Everything is taught in English there, and entire programs are offered only in English after the administrative decision to make universities monolingual. In Porvoo, they have a functional bilingual program, which the new curriculum for 2017 may change in a crucial way if English is emphasized and if the amount of Swedish-speaking students keeps on falling. The campus called Alere in Vaasa has potential and possibilities, but do we have innovative actors and commitment at various levels so that something actually can be made to happen remains to be seen. And we can start drawing conclusions by looking at the characteristics of the concept immersion in higher education. This is a concept of action, and such concepts have six characteristics, six classes. Agent, intention, method, time, location, and circumstances. And based on the examples I have shown you today, I have tried to identify the essential realizations of the characteristics in each category. As I see it, one of the most defining characteristics is the programmatic use and learning of second language, which allows the intertwining of linguistic aims with the rest of the targets. An open question for me is whether education for multilingual groups can be defined as immersion, and the role, or maybe more precisely the proportion of English in this context, is also something that needs to be discussed. The basis for this model is the triangle model, which we looked at earlier. I have modified this model to match the current situation in higher education in Finland. This is where we stand today. We have courses applying immersion methodology, both language and content-driven. And there are immersion paths which create new forms of integration between language and content. The top of the figure, LSP programs, is still missing because the integration of methods and goals is still incomplete to such an extent that we could talk about synthesis. The concept system for immersion in higher education could look like this. Instead of taking the criteria of scale and the percentages, 50 and 25, or the national languages versus English as starting point, this visualization highlights the characteristic programmatic at the first level and then the orientation towards languages or content at the next level. It may work in Finnish context. I don't know. I have to test it. And this is the current situation. We have programs on lower levels. Then there is something maybe on the secondary level. My students will take a look at that. It is vocational education of nurses. And then we have these adaptations. And I hope that in the future we can stand up and not slip totally here. And it is symptomatic because everyone wants the results, but no one wants to work holistically with this. And we have some kind of stop and goes and half-ready improvisation or rescue operations are needed all the time. I claim that there is no complete picture of the immersion-related possibilities of and restrictions on second language learning in higher education in Finland today. Different actors have different agendas and views. And the issue should be a source of general concern because immersion at different levels of the education system is one of the necessary conditions for societal bilingualism in Finland. If a shared understanding of the development and direction cannot be reached and supported, monolingualism can easily take over at national level, and this would be a step too far backwards and weaken Finland not only in Scandinavia but also in the global context. And finally, we get back to the anecdote and see what happened to the pronouncing parrot after the secondary school. In 1987, that is the same year immersion education was implemented in Vaasa, I got a study place at the University of Vaasa. And thanks to Professor Laureen, the university courses were communicative in all contexts, and the students' initiative and responsibility were stressed according to immersion methodology. After my MA degree in 1992, I started my doctoral studies and began to teach Swedish and Finnish at the university. After becoming part of the working community, I was able to widen the context for interaction for coffee room, to networks, and to experience and verify the results of immersion via students and research results, and also test the methods in my own teaching. I would like to call this mentor immersion because both my supervisor and other colleagues took a helpful and supportive role, but at the same time very active role in this process. And when I defended my thesis in 2000, I was able to say that I was bilingual. And finally, the Canadian immersion has made it possible for me to share my thoughts with you today. I was lucky to have the opportunity to learn through experience that language is interaction. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for giving me and us the languages, and thank you for all the shared experiences, knowledge and ideas, which I can in my turn take home with me from Canada after this symposium as a souvenir and gift to Finnish immersion, which will celebrate its 13th anniversary in October. Thank you. Oh, so many words. If the chair allows, can I start asking?
Yes, of course you may. Thank you.
Thank you. When you run, what do you think about these limits? This is a crucial question for me. The percentages. Is this something we need? Yes, the trees.
What is the SW and F?
Finnish and Swedish.
Swedish
yes.
and Finnish.
So, but what do you think?
I thought that was very comprehensive.
Because this is just something someone has put here. This limit. This is okay. I know this is okay, but this 25%. And what about higher education? Should we have such a limit? Count how much we have in each language? What do you think? Is this something we need?
Just a clarification. I mean, demanding that Swedish be taught, and do they want to have it for themselves, but also for everyone else? I mean, is there a strong demand? Is the demand quite local in certain areas?
You know, it's in the legal system. Everyone must learn Swedish and Finnish, and yes. And then, for example, all the policemen working in bilingual police units should know both languages.
So it's there and it's necessary apparently, but not strongly enough that the resources are being made available for it. They said people really want it. I don't know. But I do agree with you that 25% basic education, you mean elementary school? Yeah, I wouldn't call that immersion. It's probably
No.
better to make it intensive at that point. And if they have a good basis when they get up to university, then anything helps. I'm sure. But it's good to have it, as much as possible.
And what about another question?
No, of course.
Sorry, I have many questions. What about this translanguaging thing? How much is allowed, if I ask so? Is there any limits for translanguaging in immersion classrooms?
This is for university context?
Yes.
That's in university.
Yes. No, I know. So should we in Finland choose the Canadian model, no translanguaging, or should we choose the Spanish model, or something between? It's possible to choose in Finland, so we need a model. What is the best?
Just a little bit of insight from some of the work I've done with students. And my sense is that translanguaging happens whether we ban it or not. The students are coming in with multilingual brains, multiple competences. And then, so the question becomes, you can ban it, but I think if you ban it, you're just basically telling them to hide something that they're going to do anyways, in their heads or outside of the class.
Yeah.
So I think we saw some interesting examples this morning of how there is some synergies and interesting insights to be gained when the students are allowed to combine their various competencies. It is delicate though, because when it's a minority language versus a majority language, you have to. But I think it's not so much ban or don't ban it, but actually when you give a task to the students. What's the goal of the task? What's the final product? If the final product allows them to translanguage, that's an interesting question. Or you say, no, it has to be all in Swedish. But while you're doing it, go ahead with the translanguage. I think that's where it's not just one or the other. It's more in the design of the task that you give to the students. But I personally believe there's a big advantage in allowing students to explicitly make it available to themselves and to reflect on what's going on with their languages through translation.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there any questions in the room? No? Nikolai?
Do I have a second then for a comment on translanguaging again? I mean, I think this is such a wonderful question that you posed. I think there's a recent article in the International Journal of Bilingual Education and Bilingualism where, since you mentioned the Spanish model, I think Senos and colleagues talk about it, and it's such an unexplored area, really, and people really don't know to what extent it can be harnessed and used for something positive that actually can help language acquisition and language use and socialization and so on, or to what extent it can be kind of a negative thing which does not push the students into maybe the risk-taking factor of taking advantage and using the target language as much as possible. Is it a crutch, or is it a crutch that will always use with them and never and get addicted to that crutch? So anyway, I just wanted to say that I can forward you that article in case you.
Yeah, thank you.
Don't have it.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. A last question.
Please use the
Yes. Or comment.
So I have with in professional contexts, to what extent is it realistic and feasible if it becomes a habit in a way of mine to communicate in that way, to help the communication process with a client, with a patient, right? Because in the post-secondary sector, we're preparing students to some extent. We want them to have a liberal education, but a lot of them, they want jobs. And the way that the real, the reality of the situation in some occupations is that you can't really use trans language. But in others, it can be an advantage. I don't know. It's complex.
Well, we're going to the 12th floor. But before we do, I would like to thank Professor Pieke for your talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we're going back to the 12th floor where we had our lunch, and we will have discourses, speeches, merci. Speeches, but also a ceremony, an award ceremony, and bites and drinks.
Drinks and food and drinks.
Yes, and we can talk and discuss. Thank you.